The lights were pink. The music sweet and love was supposed to win. But under the glitter of British reality television, one woman's heart was quietly breaking beneath the weight of her own smile. Caroline Flack wasn't just another TV host. She was the face of modern romance, the voice that told millions of strangers that love could be found under studio lights. Yet, when the cameras stopped rolling, that same light turned into something merciless, reflecting every crack in her private world. For years, she was adored, the girl who laughed the loudest, danced the freest, and carried entire shows on the rhythm of her warmth. But one winter evening in 2019, that warmth became a headline. The laughter stopped, and a nation that once loved her began to question her every move. She built her career helping others find love only to be destroyed by the love story they never understood. This is the story of Caroline Flack, when the light of fame collided with the darkness of judgment, and when love itself turned against her. Caroline Louise Flack was born in 1,979 inches Thetford, Norfolk, a small English town that felt a world away from the dazzle of prime-time television. Yet even in her earliest school plays, she had that rare magnetism, a spark that could light up a room before she even spoke. By the late 2000s, Britain knew her name. Caroline became one of television's most familiar faces, moving with effortless charm between The X Factor, Strictly Come Dancing, and finally, the crown jewel of modern British pop culture, Love Island. In that sun-drenched villa of laughter and flirtation, she was more than a presenter. She was the heartbeat of the show, the one who made romance feel cinematic again. Her smile, bright, mischievous, and a little self-mocking, became a kind of national comfort. To millions, she embodied warmth and sincerity in a world increasingly filtered by screens. Yet behind that glow, the industry she loved was changing. Social media turned every whisper into a headline, every mistake into a storm. Caroline wasn't just performing anymore, she was being watched, weighed, and judged by millions she could never see. And as her fame soared, the question grew louder. What happens when the spotlight that made you refuses to let you breathe? In the late 1,990 seconds, when most of her peers were still figuring out who they wanted to be, Caroline Flack already knew she wanted to perform. She had the kind of presence that couldn't be taught unpolished, a little chaotic, but alive. Her early days were filled with bit parts on sketch comedies and small theater gigs, the kind of work that never makes headlines but builds resilience. Her first breakthrough came with Bo Selecta, a show that gave her the confidence to move from anonymity to recognition. From there, she moved quickly through the ranks of British entertainment, hosting Too Much Information, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, Now, and later, The Extra Factor. She had charm without trying, that rare ability to make television feel human. Caroline wasn't the kind of presenter who stood above her guests, she stood beside them. She laughed with contestants, teased them, sometimes even hugged them when the cameras weren't supposed to roll. Her warmth was unscripted and it made her unforgettable. In 2014, she stepped into the world of dance and stunned audiences by winning Strictly Come Dancing. It was her fairy tale moment sequence, applause, and validation from a world she had long admired. But it was her next role, Love Island, that would define her career and, unknowingly, her undoing. When Caroline walked into that villa under the Mediterranean sun, the audience felt at home again. Her voiceover, playful and knowing, guided millions through summer romances and heartbreaks. Yet for all her grace, the light that surrounded her was starting to sharpen, turning, slowly, from warmth to glare. By 2018, Caroline Flack had become more than a presenter, she was a cultural fixture. Every summer belonged to her voice, her tan, her laughter echoing through television sets across Britain. But with every episode of Love Island that soared in ratings, something inside her began to fracture. Fame, once thrilling, started to feel like exposure. Her life, every friendship, every relationship, every moment of vulnerability became material for tabloids hungry for contrast. The Queen of Love, who couldn't find love herself. Reporters waited outside her home. Strangers dissected her relationships on social media. The same charm that made her famous was now being used against her, framed as flirtation, instability, drama. When she dated younger men, she was mocked. When she stayed silent, she was accused of hiding something. Her fame had stopped being a gift and had become a mirror, one that distorted everything she was. Inside the industry, the pressure intensified. Reality TV was changing. Shows were becoming darker, faster, more sensational. Caroline had built her brand on empathy. Not spectacle, but the world was moving in the opposite direction. Still, she smiled. Still, she danced. Still, she told contestants to believe in love, even as hers was falling apart. Her friends noticed the cracks, the exhaustion in her eyes after long nights, the need to check her phone even during quiet dinners. She once joked that she could hear headlines being written about her before they appeared. It wasn't a joke for long. The spotlight that once lifted her now trapped her, its warmth gone, replaced by an unforgiving glare. In December 2019, the headlines changed overnight. The woman once known for bringing others together was now accused of tearing someone apart. A domestic incident involving her boyfriend, Lewis Burton, was splashed across every front page before any facts could settle. The tabloids didn't wait for a verdict, they had already written their own. Caroline was charged but never convicted. The case never reached a courtroom, yet the damage was done. Networks suspended her, her shows were stripped away, and her image, once the nation's sweetheart, was turned into a spectacle of shame. She withdrew from Love Island, the very show that had defined her career. For the first time in years, her voice was no longer part of the British summer. Behind closed doors, she tried to find calm. She wrote in her private journal words that would later be read by the public after her passing, words trembling with guilt, fear, and a plea for understanding. "I am broken," she wrote. "I am so sorry." Friends described those months as a blur of silence and panic. Caroline's phone became both her comfort and her curse, a constant reminder of the noise she couldn't escape. Cameras still flashed outside her flat. Online strangers debated her morality like it was entertainment. The legal system called her innocent until proven guilty. The internet didn't. She was no longer the smiling host in sequins. She was now a headline, one that refused to end. February 2020. London was grey, the streets heavy with rain. Inside a small flat in Stoke Newington, the cameras were gone, the laughter faded, and Caroline Flack was finally alone. It was Valentine's weekend, a cruel irony for someone who had once built her world around love stories. In those final days, she had been preparing for her upcoming trial, maintaining a fragile optimism for a return to television. Her closest friends described her as trying to hold on, alternating between brief bursts of hope and deep, unspoken exhaustion. The woman who had comforted so many others could no longer find comfort for herself. When news of her passing broke, it struck the country like an unexpected silence. Fans didn't believe it at first. They had seen her on their screens too often to imagine her gone. But as the confirmation came, Britain's entertainment world stopped. Love Island went dark for a moment of tribute. Co-hosts, contestants, even viewers who had once criticized her, now mourned her as if the loss were personal. The tabloids that had once pursued her ran black banners of regret. Social media filled with apologies that came too late. And in that flood of remorse, the question everyone asked was the one she could no longer answer: how did we let this happen? Her mother later released parts of Caroline's journal, hoping people would understand the pain behind the headlines. The entries read like confessions, not of guilt, but of fragility. A woman desperate to be seen as human again. The final curtain had fallen, not on a stage, but in silence. In the wake of Caroline Flack's passing, Britain began to look at itself in the mirror. The tragedy wasn't just hers, it belonged to a generation that mistook visibility for connection. The outpouring of grief was immediate and immense. Candles lined the streets, letters flooded her family home, and the phrase, "be kind," spread across social media like a collective confession. Politicians, journalists, and broadcasters debated the role of the press in her downfall. Out of the anger and mourning came a proposal, Caroline's Law, aimed at holding media outlets accountable for publishing intrusive, defamatory stories about those not convicted of any crime. It became more than legislation. It was a moral reckoning. Her colleagues remembered her not for her scandals, but for her laughter. Contestants she had once interviewed shared stories of her quiet gestures, the reassuring smile, the whispered, "You'll be fine," before the cameras rolled. Those memories became the fragments of light that survived the storm. Today, when Love Island returns each summer, her absence still lingers like an echo in the villa's glow. The show continues, but her presence remains inseparable from its history, a reminder that charm and compassion are not invincible shields. Caroline Flack's story became a warning written in light, that fame without mercy becomes a form of violence, and that sometimes the kindest thing the world can do is simply to listen. In the end, Caroline Flack's story is not about a fall from grace, it's about what happens when grace itself becomes impossible to hold. She lived in a world built on attention, yet was undone by the same gaze that once adored her. The contrast between fame and shadow was never clearer. She gave light to millions but couldn't escape the darkness that light created. There is a haunting symmetry to her journey, the woman who comforted others in heartbreak, consumed by her own. Her story forces us to confront a truth most of us avoid, that fame, stripped of empathy, becomes cruelty disguised as entertainment. Behind every smile we see on screen, there is a heartbeat trying to keep pace with expectation. Behind every headline, a human being trying not to disappear. Caroline's name now stands for something larger than a tragedy. It stands for the right to be seen gently, even when the world demands a spectacle. If this story touched you, take a moment before you judge the next headline. Remember that behind the screens, the laughter, and the edited moments, there's always a real person, fragile, hopeful, and fighting battles we'll never see. Share what you remember about Caroline Flack. Speak her name with kindness. And let her story remind us that compassion should never arrive too late. Because every spotlight fades, but empathy doesn't have to. Fame and shadows, every star has its story.